Oh my god, have you seen the new group loot? It is shit. Jesus, man. The reception is all over the place. But listen, we do have a new group loot system, and it could be the beginning of something awesome to have in the future for the betterment of all of the groups. Is it good? Is it bad though? You know, drama and eccentrics apart. Well, this is what we're going to be talking in today's video, and also go over everything that you need to know about group loot, how it works, and if you should be happy or not. But let's see. And before we go into the details of it, if you like the content that we do and you want to see more of this opinion pieces, analyzing and breaking down the game, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and enable those notifications. It's like 3 little things. It helps the video grow, be bigger, reach more people, helps the channel grow, and we'll be able to grow together into one amalgamous blob of WoW community thing. I'm thinking something in the realms of Lovecraftian wondrous abomination of nature. But that's fine, because we're all gonna be in this together since we are playing WoW. And let's actually talk about the group loot and what exactly is. If you haven't rated so far, basically we now have group loot, which brings back the old need before greed system, which is old. I mean, that's how I more or less got used to being able to loot in a party and a raid. And it's kind of nostalgic, but it's not quite as before. Because before, people who could not wear the item that, you know, you would want to roll on would automatically pass on it, while as now you can actually need for items that your character cannot wear. Any item can drop from the boss, especially when you go into a raid, since this is where it will apply, regardless if anyone in the raid can wear it, which is a little bit weird because this kind of feels like an unintended effect. Maybe it's a bug. We've had a hilarious example in our guild where the legendary bow dropped from Sylvanas and there was not a single hunter in the group. That's a little bit sketchy, Blizzard, I'm not gonna lie. And this could pose problems for people like really focused on, you know, optimizing all of the raid experience and gearing people up. Race the World First comes to mind, obviously, but not just limited to Race the World First. And it's weird because now you cannot predetermine the group and try to play the numbers. For instance, you know, like getting about like 20 druids in your raid to guarantee leather drops and, you know, the things for everybody to wear. You can have 20 druids in a raid and loot plate items for some reason. So maybe this can be something that can be looked into. If the boss has a chest to open and the highest roller on that item teleports out, the loot will actually stay in the chest, or, you know, come to mail as per usual, but you cannot roll out mailed items. As an example, the demon hunter who won the bow roll from Sylvanas teleported out before the loot was done rolling to everybody, and the item didn't arrive in 5 minutes as per usual, and the demon hunter basically had to come back into the raid, open the chest, and actually loot the bow for whatever reason, because demon hunters can use bows now. It's guaranteed. The range demon hunter havoc spec that you've all been waiting for is in the game, confirmed with a legendary bow from Sylvanas. No, really, but let's move on. You can kind of influence how the functionality of need before greed goes into your group by the main spec that you have chosen for yourself, because the main spec and off spec functionality is basically built in the group loot. So what that means is that the main spec takes priority than the off spec. For example, as a protection warrior myself, I can of course roll need on shield items that drop from bosses, right? But if Marcelian comes with his red paladin in the raid, he can also need on shield. But if his main spec is red paladin, I will take priority in the item over him, since my main spec is protection, even though both of us could need on that specific item. The main spec that you have chosen for yourself takes priority. And what that means is that if Marcelian is a main protection paladin tank and his main spec is set to protection, but he is red on that fight because we just need an extra DPS, he will have the same chances of winning that shield as I do on my protection warrior, since his main spec is set to protection. So that's kind of how the main spec versus off spec goes into what the game decides to be the priority for need before greed. So essentially, you can help your group and play the spec that your group needs, but still gear the ideal spec that you want, which can cause other problems. This basically helps out and is very, very helpful in raids, but could probably pose some problems into pug groups, which we will go over in a second. Another rule that you need to understand for the group loot, the need before greed system, is that you cannot win multiple copies of the same item. So if you go in a raid, this happened to our guild as well, you can kill a boss and the same trinket can drop 2 or 3 times. You can roll need on every instances of that trinket, but once you win that trinket, you'll automatically be opted out of the rolling pool so that you don't, you know, accidentally or intentionally loot that trinket twice. Also, if you already have that specific item at that specific item level equipped on yourself, you cannot roll need on it anymore, with the exception of, let's say it's the same item level, the exact same trinket, but if it has tertiary stats like speed, leech, and stuff like that, you can still need. And as far as being locked for the loot, it kind of works the same as before, even though the group loot rules have changed. So essentially, if you have looted, I don't know, Sardenathrius this week and you're going into another group that kills the same difficulty version of Sardenathrius, you cannot be traded an item that drops from Sardenathrius, even though all of the items are still tradable, even after somebody has rolled need and has gotten the item. That will not automatically turn soulbound as they would if you were in personal loot, like the old system. As an overall, let's say, positive effect of the group loot is that you can actually get more than 1 loot per boss, which is probably still more relevant in looking for groups in pug groups, because, you know, if you're like a feral druid and you have a leather chest and an agility polearm and an agility trinket and you roll need on all 3 of them, there are chances that you can actually win all 3 of them. Whereas before with personal loot, you had a chance that the boss would drop an item and it would only be 1 item, with the odd exception of like gems and shards and whatever stuff that's basically set up in a different loot pool, like, you know, conduits and stuff. So actual items, you can have more than 1 per boss. So yay. And we mentioned pugs and guilds quite a bit, so let's actually talk about how this whole system will influence your raiding experience when either in a pug group in, you know, LFR or looking for a group, or, you know, doing a normal or heroic raid, or if you are in an actual organized group or a guild. Ideally, there are definitely pros and cons to each variation, and the variation goes so far as to affect different types of guilds depending on the difficulty and the intent of their raiding experience. Because for, let's say, like an average raiding guild, like a mythic raiding guild such as ourselves, where we don't essentially push to Hall of Fame or stuff like that, personal loot was probably a little bit better for us in the way that the loot system works right now, because we trust each member of our guild. And, you know, if somebody gets an item that they don't need, they will trade it to somebody else. And, you know, hardly ever people are greedy to keep an item, even if it's like a minor upgrade, when somebody else could use it as a bigger upgrade. So personal loot wasn't that bad, as opposed to how the group loot works now, where one person, usually an officer or the raid leader, would get pretty much all of the items. We would have to, all of us pass on all of the items, wait for the leader to get all of the items, and then distribute the items individually on each player. So normally for like an average guild that just wants to go through the bosses really quick, this current version of the group's loot system is slightly more time consuming if we're going to, you know, evenly distribute the items to everybody who needs the items, and not have people, you know, need as a main red spec on a shield and not, you know, giving the shield to your main tank, a warrior or a paladin or stuff like that. This can also be an issue with trial members of a guild, who sometimes can be even worse than pugs, because, you know, there are people who join a guild simply to just get some loot and then just pop guilds time and time again until they get all the loot that they need, without actually putting in the time and effort to invest into the guild and hopefully help with progression in the end. And as far as Pugs is concerned, we have some issues here. One of the main concerns with Pugs is that a premade could actually steal your upgrade, even though everybody's rolling need and greed for fair. So for instance, friends can need for each other if they're unequipped their items, because the way that so far we have been told this works, because it's very hard to confirm, is that the item cannot be rolled on if you already have it equipped at the same eye level. But, you know, inversely, if, let's say, I want a 298 polearm and I already have it, I can unequip it and I can still need it again. Is that how it works? Or I can essentially need it for a friend, so that friend can get the polearm instead of somebody that was actually there and need it. So my friend essentially rolls need once and I roll need for them as well, and essentially has, or she has, double the chances rather, right? Two essentially chances of getting that item, which is not necessarily fair since premates in a group can potentially skew the way that the items are rolled out, and people can just need on items that they don't need and just trade it to their friends. So this is kind of like a risk that can happen when you're in the Pug world. And this, combined with a lot of issues that seemingly the group loot has created some, let's just call them mixed feelings in the community. For instance, there are very split opinions whether or not this is good, because we've seen people on the forums and in our groups talk about canceling their subs because the loot system is so bad for their alts. They're never going to be able to gear their alts if they don't have, you know, a predetermined, organized guild group to run these raids with. There are people who actually made a whole novel about, you know, group loot and why it shouldn't return and what are the pros and cons of it, mostly cons, I would imagine. There are also bugs that have been noticed by players. None of the restrictions we were promised for the group loot seems to have been working, and there are people who are actually feedbacking this on the forums as well. There are naysayers that are, you know, not seeing anything positive come out of this. While other people are still surprised as to why people are overreacting so much. And there are very negative examples of people that go into the raid as a Vengeance Demon Hunter, for instance, and rolling on a tank trinket, while an arms warrior in that group will roll on that tank trinket, and they actually, the DPS won the tank trinket and not the Vengeance Demon Hunter. And you could say that the arms warrior could be a main protection warrior and they just joined the group as an arms, but that's kind of like a hard feeling to pass when you're in a Pug group, because it doesn't feel like it's worth it, which is why the group loot is probably a much better system introduced in guilds and in organized groups. There's also an issue with LFR loot, which probably seems kind of bugged right now. We've been able to test it. So for instance, tiered tokens dropped in LFR, and Sunshade, who tested the LFR loot for us, essentially had a heroic level tier headpiece, and she could also roll on the LFR tier token for the headpiece, which doesn't seem like, it seems like it's an oversight. It seems like you probably shouldn't be able to roll that way, because you already have an item even of the higher item level, and that will take away the loot from somebody that might actually need it, while you yourself as a character, as a person, cannot use that item, or, you know, realistically wouldn't use. Why would you use an LFR headpiece from your tier set as opposed to the heroic one that you already have? So this feels like it's more or less a bug or an unintended feature of the system, and it, okay, I guess maybe in pre-patch we're supposed to test and air this all out, so hopefully by the time Dragonflight rolls out and we have access to Vault of the Incarnates, we won't have these issues. There are definitely way more problems to talk about. Obviously, when it comes to group loot, considering that there's no option to switch from it, there's the, you know, the abuse and the morality issues of this whole thing, where people can just be very, very self-concerned or self-centered and just roll need even they don't need it. Maybe they just want the transmog, maybe it's a lower level item like the tier example that I just gave, and, you know, people that actually need that item cannot essentially get the roll. So in this situation, would personal loot be better for LFR? Because it seems like personal loot in Pug groups would probably be ideal, but as it stands, we don't really have an option to swap from group loot and personal loot, so maybe this could be something that the devs can look into going forward as a feedback to the group loot implementation. Again, this would probably solve a lot of issues, or they can simply just add more options so that it functions better to organize guild groups as well, because I did mention that, for instance, for our guild, it takes almost double to 3 times the amount of time to distribute all the loot with group loot as it did prior to with the personal loot, if we want to share items and we want to upgrade certain people, or the items could be better served than somebody else. It just takes way longer, which could probably be a good thing for big guilds. But if we had more options, for instance, we could, you know, roll on main spec or off spec or disenchant or transmog, although there might be some issues with implementing too many options. People could get confused, so maybe simply just add the old personal loot and lift the restrictions when it comes to loot trading due to eye level, which they've argued and decided again and again, mentioning that you are coerced or forced into trading the item for it. But that seems like a much smaller problem than what we're having right now. Not to mention, you know, when you're going into a group, you're going with the premise that you're either keeping the item, agreeing to either keep the item, or agreeing to trade the item if it's an upgrade for somebody. these are usually rules that settle, and when you're in a pug group, you can just keep the item that you want and not have to trade it, but that's, you know, the personal loot. So once again, it could be better to have other options than group loot, which could help pugs even more. Or even better, something that a lot of people have been saying for so many years, is that master loot was still a much better instance, at least for organized groups. That is basically better than group loot, since it's more organized. We agreed that it's going to be master loot. All the items are going to the raid leader. The raid leader distributes the items the way they see fit, or we can roll for them and it's all fine. Instead of having them all go through group loot, having to wait for all 20 people, if we're talking about a, you know, mythic standard group, all 20 people roll need or greed, wait for everybody to roll, potentially take into consideration the fact that we're swapping people between bosses, people are leaving, then they didn't roll, or the system bugged, and we have to wait 5 minutes for each individual item to tick and, you know, auto pass away, so that the raid leader can then, you know, get the item and then distribute them fairly. So the group loot can cause time issues for organized group as well, where master loot could solve all the issues. And this could probably be a solution for guild groups and, you know, pre-mates and organized groups like that, while for the looking for group or LFR groups or things like that, personal loot will probably still be more ideal. These are kind of like what we've learned with, what is it, 2-3 weeks of group loot so far. It's, well, I guess it's good that we're going into a direction where we can have more options, but personally, I thought that we were going to be able to choose between personal loot and group loot, but it seems like we're still shoehorned into like one direction, and hopefully the feedback is well heard, because right now there are very few fixes that you can do as a player. You can use add-ons that can help you out, especially in guild groups like RC Loot Council, which has been updated and it can be used in guild groups, and it makes the whole thing a lot smoother. But it has been a little bit of a clusterfuck, which, I mean, if all of these bad things, all of the bugs, all the issues that people have been encountered can be fixed and, you know, chiseled out and finessed while we're waiting for the season 1 of Dragonflight, this could be a much better situation. Hopefully the devs are listening to the feedback and not just the outrage, because Jesus, there's so much of it. But maybe we can use this to have a much better raiding experience when it comes to loot, where we don't have to forcibly keep an item just because it's an item level upgrade, even if you don't want it and you want to trade it but you can't. And now with the group loot, but what do you guys think? Leave a comment down in the section below and tell us what your experience with group loot has been. Was it a good one? Was it a bad one? And what crazy stories of Vengeance Demon Hunters looting legendary Sylvanas bows do you have? Thank you for watching the video. Thank you, Patreons, for supporting the content and being a part of all of it that we do. If you, dear viewer, want to support us a little bit more, consider checking the Patreon link down in the description below and supporting our content. We would love you for it. It would actually help us a lot. Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.